Welcome to This Week in West Hempstead. We've got a special edition on the school budget. Here is your host, David Kirshner.
Thanks, Dan. And my special guests today are Karen Brohm, who is the West Hempstead School Board President, and Joel Press, who is the District Assistant Superintendent for Business Operations. Great for you guys to be here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
First off, maybe you can tell me a little bit about yourselves and about your background?
All right, I'll go first. So again, my name is Karen Brohm. I have lived here 51 years. I married my husband, who's also a lifetime resident of West Hempstead. We have 3 children, soon to be grandparents.
Oh, congratulations.
And I've been on the school board now for about 10 years. And it's something that I take great pride in. I find it very important to make sure that we're doing what's right for not only the community, but for the children of the district. So a little bit about my background is I currently am employed with the Nassau County Police Department. I am the Assistant Bureau Director of the Nassau County Police Department's Communications Bureau, which for those that don't know what that means is 911 and police dispatch, amongst many other things that go on in the Communications Bureau, but that's what people would think of the most. Wow.
So communicating with people is really what you do best.
Yes.
That's great. And Joel?
I am. My background is actually in the law. I practiced law for about 20 years, and got into the schools through PTA, and then I actually was a school board member in my home district, and then made a little career transition over into school business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And the school board, I assume, keeps you guys really busy, right?
It does. It's a second full-time job.
Well, the truth is, we really appreciate it. I have 3 kids, and, having a school and a school system that is so strong is one of the best things about West Hempstead. So, thank you so much. I just want to come out and say that, everyone should realize how much time and effort it takes to run the schools. And not only that, but in the last few years, between COVID and, all the craziness that's going on with the budgets and the economy, it hasn't been easy. I'm sure the last 2 or 3 years have been harder than the 7 years, prior to, to that time.
It was a challenge. I mean, from budgeting standpoints and even the educational standpoint of getting the children educated while they weren't able to be in the buildings, it was definitely a challenge for our administration and our educators. And from the school board standpoint, it was very hard to not be able to always meet in public and have to do a lot of things virtually. Sometimes it's just much easier to be together when you're having conversation and you're trying to work things out.
Absolutely. And certainly I would imagine even doing budgets and kind of rolling up your sleeves would always be better to do it as opposed to, Zoom or some sort of, obscure way of getting things done. There's a lot of details in that budget, and I'm sure it took a lot of efforting to put it together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know we worked in the administration. The budgeting process itself is very, very complicated. It starts in the fall, actually before the public really sees anything. We do our first budget presentations in March, but we start in the fall. We're having conversations with administrators. So there's a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into crafting the budgets that we present to the community.
Great. So, let's dive into the budget. So there was 124 school board votes on May 17th. And all of them passed except for West Hempstead. So at the end of the day, it kind of, it sticks out and, in Newsday and gets the publicity, not necessarily in a good way. What do you think happened?
Well, everybody that keeps asking me the same question is I do think there are a couple of ways you can look at it. Number one, I think there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding out there. I think people aren't asking the questions. Sadly, if you come to any of our board meetings or you come to any kind of an event where we're distributing information, there's over 10,000 homes in West Hempstead and you're getting 25 people maybe tops to come to a meeting. Even last night under the controversy of this budget, maybe there were 35 people between the virtual audience and and the actual audience that was there.
Yeah.
And then the administration that was in the room. And it's been an issue since before me, and it's been an issue back to when we created the bond project, and people were complaining about that, and we said, if you want the answers, you have to come and hear them.
Sure.
We can put the information out, but if people if people don't read it or if they don't understand it, it's not helpful if you're not coming to us and asking the questions. I'm willing to sit down with anybody. Mr. Press has answered numerous emails and phone calls in the last few weeks, and even prior to the budget. So that's the reality of what
Sure.
happened. The other side of it is, truth be told, the people were complacent and didn't come vote. The ones that are concerned now that it didn't pass, it was because enough people that wanted it to pass didn't come out and vote. That's the truth of it all.
Yeah, and the numbers bear that out.
You can never blame the people that voted no because they exercised their right to vote. That's the way I feel. If you have all those people that are eligible to vote in West Hempstead and only 1,800 people came out and voted, it's the complacency of the people that didn't take the time to vote.
That's a really, really good point. And do you think that that was an awakening moment in the community, and now that there's a focus, we'll have larger turnout for the 21st voting day?
I would tend to think that it's going to follow suit of the last time that the budget failed and or of the bond when it failed the first time. The people that are upset that it didn't pass and those are the people that didn't come vote, will come out and vote.
Yeah, well,
And what the outcome is going to be, I would have no answer.
no, and the truth is, anyone who complains and doesn't vote, shame on them. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is democracy, and if you got an issue, don't go on Facebook and make a comment. Go to vote. That's what really counts. So yesterday, it was reported in Newsday that you did submit a new budget proposal, and it was a $71.1 million budget, and it had a $256,000 reduction. Do I have those numbers right? $256,000 off of the budget. That comes out to about a 0.6% reduction in the overall school property tax. That's based on, I think it would have gone up 2.14, and now the taxes would go up 1.5%.
That's correct.
Okay, great. So maybe you can expand on that. And do you think that a submission with a reduction of just a little bit more than 0.5% is going to be enough at this point?
Well, like Mrs. Brohm said, it's hard to know. We believe very strongly that the budget that we presented at the 2.14%, which was within the district's tax cap, was a responsible budget. That is our goal when we present any budget that we present. We went back, took another look, and we tried to bring the levy down, I guess, more in line with the average increase in the levy across Long Island districts, and I without digging deeply into the program.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying not to affect the program. Again, we do think the budget itself is responsible. It's fiscally responsible, and we are doing what some in the community are asking us to do, which is to make more use of reserves as a source of funding in the budgets. We have increased the use of reserves and fund balance in the budgets of the last few years.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about the reserves, because I know that's been a question that has been coming up, and I think there was over $17 million in the reserve. So maybe just keep going on that.
Sure. So it's important to make a distinction. There are not $17 million in the reserve. There are $17 million, $17.8 million in fund balance. Reserves are a portion of the fund balance, and this is what we have tried to, I've tried to explain in my presentations over the last couple of weeks, just to make that distinction, because there is a distinction. Reserve funds are funds where the money in those funds is held for a specific purpose, so they are restricted for that purpose. For example, we have a reserve fund for the employee retirement system. I can only take money out of that reserve fund for expenses that are related to the employee retirement system. I can't take money out of that reserve fund to cover athletics or music and art. It's not allowed. The law allows us to set up those reserve funds, and the law restricts what we can use those reserve funds for. So we have about $12.25 million in restricted in the reserve funds. The remainder of that balance is in fund balance. And the distinction there is there's certain kinds of fund balance. I don't want to get too technical. I tried to explain it just so that we put all the information out there in the presentations. But some of that fund balance has restrictions on it. But it's restrictions that the Board of Ed and the district place on it. So we've appropriated some of that fund balance, about $2.5 million, to use in the budget. And then there's this remaining unassigned fund balance. And I've been trying, and I don't know that I've been successful at trying to make that distinction in the presentations to the community. It is complicated. I understand that. When I first started with school districts and getting involved, I was the budget liaison, and I started learning, and it was confusing. It took me a while to understand because there's so many different parts of it. And that, I think it can be confusing to people who are not in school district or government finance. And so people, I think, may try to make a connection between their personal lives and school finance and say, okay, well, for example, some of the arguments we're hearing are, well, you came in under your budgeted expenses. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have a surplus, right? We don't have excess funding unless the revenue that we take in exceeds the actual expenses that we have. So we could lower our expenses, but if the revenue doesn't meet the expenses, we don't have a surplus, even though we come in under our budgeted expenses. And I think that's part of there may have been some confusion in the community. I know there was information in a flyer that got circulated that said there's $17.8 million essentially in a slush fund. Why aren't we using it? And then also listing the expenditures coming in under budget without the full picture.
So we really can't just spend money willy-nilly without any reason in this surplus budget. It's really earmarked for very specific functions. Is that correct?
The restricted reserves are, and our use of restricted reserves is a portion of the revenue source, essentially, for the budget. The bulk of our revenue comes from the tax levy and then from state aid. Those are the two largest sources. And
not directly related to revenue per se, but in part of this equation, we are looking at a school enrollment numbers that have been going down. How does that factor into the overall budget and also specifically to the reserve? In terms of the reserve, the reserves are there for expenses that we incur, and most of the expenses there we're talking about the employee retirement system, the teacher's retirement system, and the employee benefit accrued liability reserve, which is used to fund or to cover expenses related to payouts upon typically retirements. Those are all related to staffing, so it's not related to enrollment. The budget itself, we obviously take enrollment into account when we develop the budget, and the vast majority of the budget is going to be staffing and benefits. In our case, a growing portion of that is transportation. So that's the bulk of it, and we look at, and I don't really look at this as closely. Mr. Riemann and Mrs. Riley on the curriculum side look at the curriculum and say, these are the courses that we want to offer. This is the staffing we need. Some of the things that have occurred over the last number of years is, the percentage of students classified as special needs has increased. I think that's across Long Island. With that comes additional staffing needs and the need for additional resources. A lot of the students that we do have with special needs, we don't have necessarily the placement for them in West Hempstead to satisfy their needs, so we send them to out of district, largely to BOCES. Those costs are expensive. So is there a way maybe to quantify or put into perspective? You mentioned two costs that are increasing. One of them are outside transportation costs, and the other are special needs. A percentage against the whole, how much it's been going up year over year. Some perspective you can put on that?
I don't have those numbers, and those aren't the only areas. We've had an increase in the E&L population. There's been some laws passed with regard to staffing related to the E&L population as well. There's a relatively healthy part of our budget that covers out of district expenses for either our special ed students or our students attending non-public schools. So, I'm not sure if the community is aware, but we provide staffing to Hebrew Academy of Nassau County here in West Hempstead, and we used to for St. Thomas as well.
Mm-hmm.
There are costs there, and I did a kind of a quick analysis, and I'm not sure if I have it with me, but those costs have been increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Transportation for out of district has been increasing fairly significantly.
But single digits, double digits, going up 100%. Like, is there some perspective on how much these outside costs are going up compared to like the base education costs?
I haven't done that analysis. I haven't really looked at that. I just know that every year we sit with our director of special ed, and the requests come in. We need additional staffing. And those classrooms for those students are restricted by law as well in terms of the maximum number of students that can be in that classroom. So we may have an 811 classroom, so you'll only have 8 students in that class, or a 1211, or 15. So those classrooms those class sizes are much smaller than a traditional gen ed classroom where you might have 24, 25 kids or 20.
Well, we certainly would invite you to come back at a future point. Maybe we could go into some of that analysis, because I get that question asked a lot. Okay. I certainly wouldn't know the answer, but I think it is important to know which costs are rising the quickest, which ones are uncapped, which are the ones we don't have to worry about. There's some confusion, and I think getting the communications out in that would be really important.
Sure. Yeah.
So, so further in the Newsday article, you had mentioned that if this next vote fails, we could be faced with with additional cuts of about $717,000. So that's already starting to get a little bit deeper. Do you have some idea of what those austerity cuts might actually look like?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit in our meetings. When you get to that level of cutting, you are looking at things like staffing. In that case, going back to transportation, those costs have been increasing at about $1 million a year over the last 3 to 4 years, for various reasons that we are looking into and trying to be proactive with that. That's potentially an area. We transport students out of district to about 120 different locations, different schools, and that's not just an individual route. In some cases, we have multiple routes that go to the same school. So there's a lot of things we would look at. We would look at staffing. We would look at program if need be, and we'd look at transportation. Some of the areas where we have the ability to make some changes. There are certain things we can't change, certain things that we are mandated to provide, but we would look at areas such as that.
Great. So maybe you can give also just a little bit perspective on how we're doing this year. You mentioned the fact, the economy is not doing so well, and I'm putting that mildly. Got $5 gasoline. I can't even imagine what the energy costs are, for the school system. So, as far as like the run rate goes for this year, are you on budget? Are you under budget? Are you over budget? How does that look?
I on the whole, like in specific areas. So again, I hate to keep going back to transportation. We're over budget in that area.
And can I stop you there?
Sure.
How much over budget? I just want to get some, again, either a dollar amount or some perspective on this.
Sure. I think the larger area where I'm trying to recall, because I was looking at this, but I wasn't looking at it in the aggregate. In our non-public school transportation, we increased the budget for transportation about $1 million for this year, and we are exceeding that. And it's large. I think we're probably about $250,000 over budget in the non-public area. Our special education area is also coming in over budget. As you can imagine, those the needs of students generally are more costly. A lot of our special needs students require an aide or a monitor on the bus, and you get one student that's going to a certain placement. And we get that a lot. It becomes more expensive because economies of scale don't exist in that case.
And it's a double payment because you're paying for the transportation and you're paying for the schooling.
Right.
And again, with the increase in costs, there's just no way to hide these numbers.
Right. And we're looking at going into next year with transportation. There's really two ways that we approach transportation. You either bid out for specific routes, or you can renew your contracts. And when you renew your contracts, the state law says you renew at the rate of inflation. And we know it has a different rate of inflation than you read in the paper. It's not quite 8%, but it's up there. It's the highest levels that we've seen going back 20 or so years.
Yeah.
So that's one of those areas.
It's certainly going to be a huge challenge for you for the upcoming school year.
Right. Fuel costs have gone up tremendously for us, and we use fuel oil, diesel oil, number 2 fuel oil to heat the buildings, most of our buildings. So that's
maintenance, everything that touches the budget's going to go up. It's just
right. Even as things as simple as paper products, those are going up. Everything's going up. So in terms of the overall, you had asked where we're looking at coming in, on the whole, and I explained this last night, we did talk about it, our expenditures are coming in under budget. Our revenues, however, are also coming in under budget. And part of that was by design. When I think revenue, I make the distinction between sort of true revenue and the use of fund balance and reserves. Because fund balance and reserves, it's like taking money out of your savings account.
Yeah.
It's not really revenue.
Right.
It's a funding source.
So bottom line, because you lost me a little bit.
sorry.
Like a half an hour ago.
But bottom line,
Okay.
is this a downward slope of a delta the gap that's increasing on the budget, or are we going to be naturally, or is it shrinking? Nothing to do with the vote itself, just organically. Where are we heading?
I think right now, this year is going to be a little challenging for us. And I've been saying this for a few years. I keep saying, at some point, transportation's got to level out because it's been increasing at the rate of about 20% a year. It's increased about 75% leading into next year, and it's nearly doubled in 7 years. So I keep saying to myself, at some point, that's got to level out, and that would be, it would be very helpful for us. What we're looking at in terms of, the state has been very generous with school districts in increasing foundation aid. That's not going to continue forever. It can't. It's not planned to, and so at some point we've been buoyed by additional foundation aid. But that's not going to continue. So we have to look longer term.
Right.
I know a lot of the conversation, especially last night, was take more money out of the reserve, the fund balance, the savings account, to cover maybe these shortfalls, or if the budget fails a second time. It's not long term. It's not fiscally responsible to the school district.
Yeah, and to your other comment before about the busing leveling off, we know that's not going to happen. It's wishful thinking, but the demographics in the community have changed, are changing, and there seems to be a larger percentage of parents who are sending their kids to private schools. And I'm not sure that trend is going to reverse, at least anywhere in the short term. So that will only add additional pressures onto the budget, correct?
Well, I think it really depends. We send entire full large buses to outside schools. That's very cost efficient for us. Where we face challenges is when we have one child going to one school in Queens. That's where, and if we have no other bus going in that area, we this year we were paying $6,500 a month for one child, so $65,000 a year to transport that child to a school in Queens. it gets challenging in that case. When we have, there's one school in Queens, we send 4 full buses. Not so bad. We
Right.
pay about $8,000 a month for that. So and that's a lot of money, but it's not.
No, I no, totally
for an
understand.
entire
And,
bus.
and again, on the other extension, sending a child to BOCES, which are generally small.
Right.
And also, as you mentioned, the schooling is substantially higher than the public school education.
Yes.
All of these factors are just
Absolutely.
pressure cooker types of things.
Well, and just to speak to that point, because I think it's a conversation that has come up numerous times about people have this misnomer that, yes, private school or whatever, private school, parochial school, whoever chooses to not send their kids to the public school, they get a bus, they get their textbooks, we pay for their health care at school, we have to pay the school back for their health care, stuff like that. And a lot of people are saying, well, I pay, $8,000 a year in school taxes and I don't get $8,000 worth of stuff. So where is my money going? But then when you listen to something like that, where actually it's costing us $65,000 to bus your child for the year, then the whole block is paying for your child, So I have no issue with that. I went to private school in high school. My oldest son went to private school. I mean, I get it. I had to pay my tuition and I had to pay my school taxes. I do get it. It's rough. I live here too. And as I said, I work for the county. So does my husband. We're not in any, we're certainly not the Rockefellers of West Hempstead. We struggle as much as anybody else does. But when you look at that in perspective, if somebody who is saying, I pay $8,000 in taxes, doesn't realize that it could cost more than $8,000 a month to bus their child, then they're not seeing that they're actually getting their money.
Exactly. And you know what? That's exactly what our forum is all about. It's about sharing that information and being transparent and letting people know. And sometimes you have to hit them over the head, more than once or twice or 3 times, and someone say, oh yeah, I get that. I understand costs are going up. I understand there are special needs. And as a town, we're trying to accommodate it. And also things are getting tough and we're going to have to look at everything and we're going to have to squeeze. It's the reality that we're living at. We do that when we go to the supermarket and when we go to the, to fill up gas. Unfortunately, it's not going to be any different in the schools. So on a different note, just on communications, and again, we so appreciate the both of you taking your time out of your very, very busy day and coming down. And we hope that in the future you can use our platform as a means to come in and tell the story and let people, understand what's going on. Ever since, since COVID, social media has been playing a huge role, especially in what's going on in West Hempstead. There are a couple of sites where a lot of people gravitate. It's where you can find anything about a missing dog to what's going on in the budget, to a babysitter, to a traffic accident, to what's going on with the choppers overhead. But that's how people are communicating, and it's probably not going to go away in any time, certainly in the next few years. What do you guys think about, what's going on with Facebook and social as it relates to the school board, and do you pay any attention to it?
Okay, so I am on social media. I don't use social media the way most people use social media. I use social media to communicate mostly with my family who lives out of state, and to put out stuff about the school or on special occasions, celebrate my son's wedding or something like that. I do know, and I am in a lot of those groups where I've seen things posted, and I think it's wonderful when you're looking for a babysitter or a lost dog, or you need help for something, or you want to help a community member. But I do also think that the written word can be taken out of context, and or somebody's simple question can go awry in a half a second. One click of the keyboard, and you have 153 comments in 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I choose not to engage in any of those posts, whether it has to do with the schools or the school budget. My firm belief is that if somebody wants the answers, if somebody wants to ask me a question, they can do so privately. I understand that everybody wants the answer, and if it comes to me enough, I might post it and not allow comments on it just so people can see it, but I won't engage in that conversation on social media because I feel that they just become a little out of hand. It's just not who I am.
No,
I don't engage in it.
No, understand it can be a real cesspool of a location. Unfortunately, again, it's where communications take place, and we do have to, I think, be respectful of the questions. The tone can be at times, a little bit harsh, but unfortunately, again, maybe low attendance at a meeting is because people are just on social and just sending out their messages. We're not going to change the way that people behave. And, so to wrap things up, West Hempstead School District, it's a great school district. West Hempstead does well in the county, does well in New York State. West Hempstead graduates go to some of the best universities, both in the state and out of state. You guys are doing an amazing, amazing job. What do you think is in the future? Like, how do you see things both in the short term as we kind of, get through the next few weeks, which I think will be a little bit challenging? How do you see this, all playing out over the next, year or two?
Well, as I said, I've been here my entire life, and I did go to the public school system until I went elsewhere. My sister graduated from here. My husband graduated from here. I've seen the ebbs and flows of our school district from when I was a kid to now. My two youngest children went completely through the school system. My daughter graduated last year. Yeah, 2019. Had to think about that. Because it was a completely different school system. The high school was on such an upward path from where it was when my oldest son was graduating back in 2008. So to me, I feel like we're on an upward trend. I feel that our kids are doing phenomenal things. They're being recognized for wonderful things. Just in the last week and a half alone, there were so many wonderful things celebrated in our district. Graduation rate has increased remarkably.
Wow.
The morale, the pride in our schools has increased remarkably, and I see it going only upward from there. We've now created a true Princeton model in West Hempstead where we've got our kindergarten center, pre-K and kindergarten center, because we do have a pre-K now. Yeah. I'm just going to keep saying that. We have our primary school and we have our intermediate school, and now next year we'll have our 7th through 12 secondary school. So that is creating the final step in that vision that we've been fighting so hard to bring back and create in West Hempstead. So I think that we're on a path to greater things, and I think it can only go up from here.
Fantastic. And the fact that graduation rates are increasing, and it's the best way to end this conversation. And so I want to thank you, Karen, and I want to thank you, Joel, for taking the time, going into the details. Love to have some follow-up with you, and again, invite you to come back whenever. And it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thank you for watching. That concludes this special edition. To see more, check us out on Facebook and on the website, westhempsteadecho.com.